We are continuing in the book of Acts. Did you guys just like yesterday with Acts chapter 22? Acts chapter 22. I mean, yesterday with August first clicking around and the heat wave like dissipating, it felt a little bit like fall, and I know that's a scary word, but all of a sudden I'm kind of having the fall panic of like, what do I have to do for the fall? And I love fall weather, so I'm kind of excited, but it's only August, so I'm just kind of like pumping the brakes. I'm holding on. I was looking at a calendar, and Dunkin' Donuts is already like, we have our fall flavors out. I'm like, no, it's August. That's hot coffee in August. I still want that. I want regular. I want summer flavor. Acts 22, we're going to continue our series. This next chunk, and we're going to try to cover a chunk this morning because we kind of reached a pinnacle in the story of Acts, and now we're going to see a real quick, and I don't want to say downhill, that's not the right word, but it's just going to, like we reached a point and everything kind of tumbles down from here on out, if that makes any sense. Paul has gone to Jerusalem. Remember there was the prophecy saying, don't go. And Paul's like, you said, I'm breaking my heart. I must go. I need to go. And he goes to Jerusalem, and we picked up, there's tension there. I mean, mass tension, not just because of Paul, but because of all the political turmoil. And they beat him, they're beating him up, and we pick up in verse 22 of chapter 22, and the Jewish people there are listening, and it says, up to this point they listened to him. And then they raise their voices and they say, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live. Ooh. And that's where John ended last week, kind of on that cliffhanger. But this next chunk we're going to go to, it's kind of this, how Paul jumps from one scenario to another scenario. And that's the next chapters. Paul is going to continue on moving, and it's going to seem fast, but it's going to take time because he gets shipped around a little bit. But I asked myself this question because I'm trying to how do I relate this text to my life? How do I dive in and what does this mean to me? And I had a hard time relating this because it's almost such a foreign situation. I have never been beat up by a mob before, thank goodness. I do not anticipate that on my to-do list or my wish list. But I had a hard time just wrestling through it. And I'm like, how do you even get to this point? Because he's going to stand before the Sanhedrin in this chapter, 71 people of power, at least purchase power, and he has to basically go on trial. And the trial looks a lot like the trial we see in the Gospels with Jesus. It's very similar. It's kind of unfair. They're accusing him of something, and Paul is standing there, although Paul gets a little bit more snarky than Jesus does in this story. But how do I even begin to relate to this? And the thought was, well, how do you even prepare for any type of situation? How do you prepare for anything that you're in? You can't. In never my wildest dreams, or even Paul's dreams, would he be thinking through, okay, so if I go for a hostile crowd of people who would beat me, what would I say? That's not in his scenario mind. How do you prepare yourself for things like that? And so it's, how do you make decisions? You guys ever think about this? How do you make decisions? And not just what decisions do you make, but what's the process in your mind of how you make a decision? I was listening to a podcast this week, and he said this. He goes, you can think about your life all day long, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are living your life. And I thought that was kind of interesting. You can think about it. And I'm a thinker. I like to sit in my head. I like to spin ideas and think about all the what ifs, the what happens if this scenarios. But it kind of gets at it, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily living it. I'm living in my life, and I'm thinking about things, but that's not necessarily training me for what I need to be trained for. Because the other guy said this. He goes, thinking wisely is just the first step. We must also act and live wisely. And we must do so in a way that trains not only our minds, but our habits and our dispositions as well. So this is what I'm thinking about as I'm listening to Paul, as I'm reading this story. Paul has been so caught up in the gospel, so caught up in living his life, he's made 1,000 little steps, 1,000 little choices, and it has trained his habit. It has trained his heart posture, his disposition towards life, that it's not thinking through every possible scenario. He's trained his mind and his heart to react in the same way throughout any type of scenario. He's training at a deeper level. He's not just prepared, he has prepared his heart and his mind. The only example I could think of is so I work for the ambulance, I'm an EMT, and I didn't want to be. I was very hesitant about that because I don't like to make decisions quickly. Anyone else like that? I don't like to make decisions fast. I don't like to be hurried in my thinking because I'm going to make a wrong choice, and that makes me extremely uncomfortable. But I found out that one of the things that's valuable is that they train you not just to make decisions quickly. That's not really what they do. They train you to make conscious, choiced, formulaic decisions. So you go through the process step by step. You encounter a situation and you go through the step. And they train us to be ready for chaotic situations. They're training us for a type of situation, not 1,000 different types of scenarios. Does that make sense? We want to be equipped as Christians the same way. I don't want to be equipped for 1,000 different what-if scenarios, even though we do think that way. I want us to be trained to think through how I can live my life in a way that doesn't matter the scenario. I live in a way that responds Christ-like. And that's really what Paul is in. He's going to be in this just kind of chaotic, bizarre situation. And Paul isn't like, okay, I thought this through, and I'm going to say this answer. No, he is ready. Yeah, think of that verse in 1 Peter. He is prepared to give an answer in any situation, in any circumstance. Not because he's thought of every single circumstance, but because he's trained his mind in such a way that his heart is ready for all types of situations. His mind is naturally predisposed to choose Christ, to naturally preset to heart to follow Christ. He's trained himself at a deeper level, not just thinking wisely, but acting wisely as well. So, 22, Paul is saying, this man should not be allowed to live. And 23 is, and they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air. This is ramped up very quickly. Just in one verse, they went from listening to, we need to kill this man. They're taking off their cloaks. They're throwing dust in the air. They're taking off the cloak. That means like we are ready to go at this guy. Like we're taking off our outer cloak. We're ready to throw hands. And they also, some of this can also mean they can rend their cloak. That's what the Greek word means. So they can be tearing it. Meaning that we are hearing heresy, that we're hearing something that is so detrimental to who we are, and they're throwing dust because, like, what else are they going to throw? Maybe they'll find rocks, but it's also possibly this idea of, we are done with you, you are dust to us, Paul. We're done. This has elevated way high, really fast for Paul. And you can maybe feel the anxiousness, the tension, and try to picture that yourself. How would I react in this situation? Am I ready to react in this way? Because it's going to come at us real fast. It's going to come at us really quickly. I remember in college we had this, we had missions week, and one of the rooms was talking about the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge, which if you don't know about, it's a time in history not that long ago down in Southeast Asia where people would just, if you were a Christian, they would just shoot you on sight. It was a horrible experience. And they had this, you went into this room, and my friend was telling me that he went into this room and this person came up to him right away and started yelling in their face, "Are you a Christian? Do you believe in Jesus?" And he panicked. And he said, "What? No." And he was talking this through because it absolutely broke him for just a minute. He goes, "When I was pressed, I said no." And it really challenged his faith because he had to sit there. And this is just an act. It was an act. But it really pushed him to be like, what would I do under other circumstances? When I'm pressed, what else would I say? And he had to sit there, and they come back around later, and he goes, "Are you a Christian?" He goes, "Yes," but it was kind of like, but my initial reaction was panically no. And it really served to strengthen his faith in the long run. But it's the same type of thing for Paul. All of a sudden, he's teaching the gospel. He's telling people about the goodness of Jesus, and the people are like, you know what? Let's kill him. Okay, like, the reaction of Paul. He's trained. He's been beyond just thinking the situation. He's living it. And as they were shouting, throwing off their cloaks, flinging dust in the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought to the barracks. This is what they were trying to do in the first part anyways. And this mob has tried to intercept that. Not the first time this will happen, by the way. Saying that he should be examined by flogging. So Paul has just been saved. If you remember recently, the crowd had bound his hands and was beating him. It was beating him severely. He had to be literally carried out. And so the tribune comes, or the tribune orders the Roman officials to come. They break up the fight, and they're carrying Paul. And Paul's got to be a little relieved, but he's going right to the tribune where to be flogged, to be examined. So he's not exactly moving up in the world. He's going from one beating to another beating. I was just reading The Hobbit with my kids, and I remember the chapter, out of the frying pan and into the fire. He's not necessarily better off than Harry was, but he is. We'll see that in a minute here. Because that really leads us to the first thing. How do we prepare ourselves? How do we train our hearts to do this way? And I think it's all the little decisions leading up to these things. Training myself for the future means training myself today and tomorrow. And it's 1,000 little steps that help me make the big choice later on. And the 1,000 little steps today are trusting in God's providence. It's an easy thing to say. This is one of the things that we say all the time as Christians. Oh yeah, I trust that God will provide. I trust that God will provide. And we can say it, but there's a whole different level to living it out. How do I live this out day by day? And one of the challenges I think we can all take in is, how do I actually see God's hand in my life? When you look back and reflect at the things of the day, do you see, man, I'm so thankful that God provided me enough money to buy groceries. Man, I'm so thankful that I have a car that runs. Man, I am so thankful that I have a home that has air conditioning. We don't typically live our minds that way. I was challenged once to write down the providences of God, the things how that God has done explicitly in my life. And the first day I wrote down like one thing. And by the end of the month, I was writing down pages for just the day, how God has moved in my life just that day recently. And it's the little things. Thank you for friends who invest in me, for people who will speak truth to me, for you name it. All of a sudden it's like, it's not just, well, this is just my life and this is how it is. It's, I am so thankful that God has made my life this way. And beginning to train my mind that way trains the way that I express and make choices. Because now my life is lived a little bit differently. And here we have Paul about to do the same thing. He's about to be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him. Because, why not just ask Paul? But of course we can't do that because we're Romans and we like to flog people. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, this is verse 25. It's exactly how it sounds. Paul said to the centurion who was standing right by him, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" Ooh, this is a big thing. And here's, I think, the brilliant providence of God, because this is not just like a recent happenstance. This is from birth. Paul was born a Roman citizen. It is severely important. Citizenship in the Roman Empire is different than we have it today. Today, if you were born in America, you are a citizen. Okay? In the Roman Empire, that is partially true, but also you had to have a lot of influence and a lot of money and a lot of powerful friends to get the type of citizenship that Paul is talking about. Paul was born into a very well-off family. Okay? We're going to see in a bit that there are other people who don't have that luxury. They had to purchase it for an exorbitant amount of money, not what we typically would have. So Paul is a Roman citizen, and what we're finding out is that this is a big deal because you cannot just beat someone up. That's due justice. You can't do anything. This is a precursor to our justices. You can't do anything until he has been proven guilty. And to do so for a Roman citizen, to beat that person up, is extremely, extremely badly. If you read the old Roman guy Cicero, he says to bind a Roman citizen without justice is terrible. But to beat him, it says, is an abomination. Just to beat him is an abomination. So all of a sudden the centurion has this moment of, what have we done? You have to realize the impact of Paul's words. What have we done? Paul has played a huge card. Huge something. And this isn't because it's so easy to read this historical as like, oh, Paul's so lucky. No, there's no luck in this. There's no coincidence in this. This is the perfect planning and providence of God, that Paul was a Roman citizen. You cannot, is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen without being uncondemned? And the centurion in verse 26 heard this, because he stopped, and he heard this, and he went to the tribune and said to him, what are you going to do? Because this man's a citizen. Oh. Well, maybe you're thinking, well, maybe Paul just made it up. Maybe that's happened before. And if you look in the history, it has. But the people who made it up and then were found out to have made it up were killed. So it is not something that people do for fun. If you make up that, oh, don't beat me, I'm a Roman citizen. Well, now you were going to get beat, now you're going to be killed. It is, again, something they do not take lightly at all. But the Roman tribune is trying to figure this out. So the tribune comes, this is 27, and said to him, tell me, are you a citizen? So they are serious enough that they're coming down out of their council, they're coming down to Paul, and he says to him, you can imagine the guy looks at Paul and says, you need to tell me right now, are you a Roman citizen? Yes. And the tribune answers, this is the Roman tribune, I bought this citizenship for a large sum. But Paul said, but I am a citizen by birth. Now, they have not even equaled the same amount. For him, who is a powerful person in charge in this city, he had to spend a large sum. We don't know the amount. But Paul says, but I've been by birth. Guess which one is worth more? By birth. By birth. And it just goes back, this is reading into it a little bit, but for those who think we can buy salvation by works or by effort, that's no salvation at all. That's no citizenship at all. Even in standard Roman, to be born of a citizenship is worth far more. To be born again in Christ by our salvation is to be worth far more. To be born into that is to be born into an inheritance, which is salvation itself. There is no way to be a citizen of heaven other than to be reborn by Jesus himself. There is no other way. There may be false people who say that, but there's no other way but to gain the inheritance by being a son and daughter of the King. But I am a citizen by birth. So those who were about to examine him withdrew, and immediately the tribune also was afraid. Yeah, because they've done something pretty bad. They have bound and beat a Roman citizen. Not by Paul's so lucky. We shouldn't say that. I've often found myself, man, I'm lucky in life. And then I'll be corrected by people, no, you're blessed. And that's true. But I'm blessed because God has providentially poured into my life even when I didn't deserve it. I live grace not just in the salvation of my grace, but I live in grace just day by day, by hour. I am so thankful for how God has providentially loved me. So next part. Now we kind of shift here. Paul is moving now to the council. It says, on the next day, desiring to know the real reason why he was being accused by the Jews. Because even the tribune's like, okay, there's something fishy going on here. This doesn't seem quite right. What's really happening? What's the real reason that this is going on? Because Paul's like, not really, we can't believe him because he's the criminal. So we have to actually figure this out. That's why they're going to beat him. They're trying to get him to say something that they knew what to do with. He was unbound, and he was commanded to the chief priest and all of the council, which is the Sanhedrin, to meet. And he brought Paul down and set him before them. So this is a big deal. If you remember back to the Gospels, when Jesus was arrested, he was brought before the Sanhedrin. This is a large group of people. If you read history, this is called the Great Sanhedrin. This is a mix of Sadducees and Pharisees and high priests and scribes. 71 people of power. These are people who bought this power or gained this through political maneuvering or through financial gain. This is a group of people in Jerusalem that do have a lot of power. They're judging. They have the power of justice as well. This is outside of the Roman justice system. This is the Jewish justice system. Wow, that was a tongue twister. Jewish justice system. Okay, go home and practice that. Okay. And they're bringing them before the council. 71 people, mixes of both, mostly Sadducees. And looking intently at the council. And you read that phrase, and you would think maybe it's the council who are supposed to be the judges. But the word is from Paul. And this is a unique word to Luke when he writes this about Paul. It's a unique word in the New Testament for the word looking. Maybe some of your translations have staring or gazing, but the Greek word actually means to look upon in judgment. Paul is looking upon the justice team with judgment because he knows what's corrupt. That's a pretty powerful place to be. That's a confident Paul. Not because he's so full of himself, because he is found so securely in Jesus. He has got no other person telling him his identity. He is totally secure in what this is. He knows exactly that. He goes, you can do whatever you want to me. I know where I'm going. You can do whatever you want to me. I know my gospel is true. You can do whatever you want to me. I'm going to not stop proclaiming Jesus. And so he stares at him because he knows that they're in the wrong. And he's like, I will stand here and I will look at you. And can you imagine the people who are looking at Paul and they can kind of like, they know they're corrupt. This is not the priesthood of the Old Testament. They have been gone. This is the corrupt priesthood. I would kind of sitting there like this. The gaze of Paul. Can you imagine? The gaze of Paul. And he says, brothers, I have lived my life before God in all good conscience up to this day. And Paul has. He has lived his life according to what Jesus has asked him to do. He's followed the laws. He has not controversy. He's not stirred this up. He's not done the things that his opponents are saying them to do. He is preaching that the Messiah, the one who they've been waiting for thousands and thousands of years in the Old Testament, is Jesus. He's preaching the fulfillment of the Jewish religion. He's preaching that God himself came, took on flesh, and said, I will die for you and take your sin and give you my righteousness. That's what they've been waiting for, but Jesus didn't appear like they wanted him to, so they rejected him. A lot of them did. All Paul is preaching is the fulfillment of what they've been waiting for. I've lived in good conscience. I've been the guy proclaiming the truth. And the high priest, Ananias, commanded those who stood next to him to strike him on the mouth. Ooh. Do you guys like political mini-dramas? This is shaping up to look like one a little bit. This is not proper procedure for the Sanhedrin. This is out of bounds. This is getting chippy really fast. You're not supposed to do that. He has not been condemned, but they are quite obviously frustrated and mad at Paul. Then Paul says to him, and this is pretty amazing. He says, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Oh man. Now, the temptation is to think that Paul's mad and he's throwing out insults. This is not necessarily just a retaliatory insult. This is something more. If we flip in your Bibles, if you have your Bibles and you want to flip to Ezekiel chapter 13, this is what Paul is quoting. He's quoting Ezekiel 13. And this is a phenomenal thing because this is even worse. This is even deeper than what he's actually getting at. If you go to 13 and you start in verse 8, and it says, because you have uttered falsehood. This is the prophet Ezekiel speaking on behalf of God, condemning the false prophets of Israel. People who claim to be of Israel, claim to be of the religious true. And Ezekiel's saying, oh, wait a second. Because you've uttered falsehood and seen lying visions, therefore I am against you, declares the Lord God. And remember, the Pharisees and Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, would have this memorized. They would know exactly what Paul is quoting. My hand, is what God says, will be against the prophets who see false visions and who give them lying divinations. They shall not be in the council of my people, nor be enrolled in the register of the house of Israel, nor shall they enter the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am the Lord God. Precisely because they had misled my people, saying peace when there is no peace. And because when the people built the wall, these prophets smeared it with whitewash. This is exactly what they knew. They knew exactly what Paul was referencing to. And there will be a deluge of rain, and hailstones will fall, and the stormy wind will break your wall. Paul is saying, you know you are in the wrong. You know that you have misled these people. You know that you are false prophets. You know this is not what God has called us to be about. And you are continuing to live in this lie, continuing to gain and manipulate power because you want it. You are a whitewashed wall. I just imagine in my mind, There's a little bit of a silence after Paul says that. as the Sanhedrin contemplates exactly what Paul has told them they are. And Paul isn't saying, I'm going to take care of this because I'm the guy. He says, no, God will strike you. This is Ezekiel's warning. It's Paul's warning to them. Unless you change, unless you shift, you will continue to be this corrupt, powerful people that are leading people astray. Tens of thousands of people they're leading astray. Picking up in verse 3. Are you sitting with judge to judge me according to the law? And yet, contrary to the law, you order me to be struck. Paul is quoting the law saying, you don't even know the law. You're not supposed to strike me, and yet you still did. Those who stood by said, would you revile God's high priest? You can't talk back to the high priest. That is a commandment of the Jewish law. You can't do that. And Paul says something I think is, he goes, I didn't know, brothers, that he was the high priest, for it's written, you shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people. But here's the reality is, Paul knew exactly who he was. But Paul was continuing to double down saying, he is no high priest of mine. Because he is corrupt. He is the one who's bought it by power and position and maneuvering and manipulation. He's not the high priest. He's not the one chosen to represent the people of God. So this is getting real tense. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out, brothers, I am a Pharisee. Paul's not betraying. He truly was raised as a Pharisee. And he's saying, I also have a position. I also have a position on some matters that are going to come up. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. He's saying something. And when he said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees because the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angels, nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. Paul is saying, wait a second, there's something going on here. Again, the providence of God is speaking, arranging this, saying, Paul's like, I am a Pharisee. He's not saying I'm betraying everything I've just said. He goes, no, my position on this is I believe in the resurrection. And there are half the people in the council saying, hold up, that's not true. And the other half are saying, wait, no, it is true. And there's an argument. So the council is starting to divide. They're starting to have their own division and controversy. Well, Paul is basically trying to get the focus off of him. Hey, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about something else. But Paul is relying on something far, far greater. He's going back to something true. He's not trying to just stir up a moment because he can, because he wants to move the controversy. He's getting to the heart of Christianity as well. The heart of Christianity as well. Because the one thing that we are based on as Christians is Jesus himself. And the greatest thing that Jesus did was die for us. But the greatest thing to fulfill that, to seal that, to make it the name above all names and everything is that he didn't stay dead. He resurrected. That is a huge, huge part of the story. In the old ancient Israel, the old time, this is what was the foundation. This is what was controversial, was that Jesus didn't just die for his people, he resurrected. And that's why we have such great faith to know that I will live eternally. I don't just have my sins forgiven, but I will live forever with God because Jesus did not stay dead. And Paul is appealing back to the power of the resurrection. He writes a letter not too far before he got here in Corinthians. He says, if there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain. We have been found to misrepresent God because we have testified that God has raised if he did not. Paul is placing all of it, the crux on, this whole thing is true because he didn't stay dead. That's a powerful thing. But of course, the Sanhedrin misses it. And they go off and they debate. And it says, verse 9, a great clamor arose, and some of the scribes and the Pharisees' party stood up and contended, we find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel spoke to him? And when the dissension became violent, this is not standard procedure, the tribune, afraid that Paul would be torn to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him away among them by force and bring him to the barracks again. Again, he has to go to the barracks for Paul's own safety. The following night, the Lord stood by him. And this has got to be the most encouraging thing that happened. Of all the tension and the turmoil and all the things, and Paul is being beat, and he's being saved to only be beat again, and he's trying to live his life faithful to God. He's trying to trust in the providence of God. And here, this is what comes out. That night, The Lord stood by him. Stood by him. Take courage. Man, that's got to be an incredible word to hear from Jesus himself. As for you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome. So Paul's been told a couple of things. One, we have Jesus himself comforting him. But also, I'm so proud of you for defending me in Jerusalem, but you also need to go and defend me in Rome. So Paul knows he's going to make it out of the city at least. He's going to make it out alive. Because there is some tension of this. What happens? There's a lot of people in this town who want him dead. But Jesus says, no, I need you to go testify about me in Rome. And when it was the day, this is verse 12, the Jews made a plot and bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. This is a group of they were more than 40 who made this conspiracy. 40-ish people bound themselves. This is a type of religious oath. This is a religious thing that they're doing. That they are going to taste no food until we have killed Paul. Well, they might starve to death because we just know Jesus told them he's going to be protected. But this is tight. This is tense because they're saying Paul is against what we're about. So now therefore you, along with the council, give notice. They're conspiring to say to the council, bring him down as though you're going to determine his case again, and we are ready to kill him before he gets there. So they're going to ambush him on the road to the council again. But the son of Paul's sisters heard of the ambush and went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Man, Paul's so lucky. And Paul called one of the centurions and said, take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell them. So he took him and brought him to the tribune, and Paul said, Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring you this young man. He has something to say. So the tribune took him by the hand and went outside and says, what do you have to tell me? I mean, just can you imagine him going to this little boy and just sitting down like, well, what do you have to say, hon? What do you have to say, boy? And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as they were going to inquire about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready and waiting for your consent. Can you imagine? His eyes probably got about that big. His entire conspiracy has just been blown wide open by a 10-year-old. There's more going on here. Paul is protected. Paul is trusting. God is at move. God is providentially, continually leading the way. And we know how Paul goes into these situations because he just knows through 1,000 other situations in his life, he has seen God provide in other little ways. And yet, looking at death in the face of a trial, he continues to still trust because his heart, his disposition has been trained by the conscious choices of saying, I still know. I saw God provide me with this. I saw God provide me with that. And 1,000 other things to this point where it's like, how do you even live in a difficult situation? How do you encounter life? How do you train yourself for that day by day, moment by moment? And the Pharisees and the tribune, with the greatest conspiracy with the Jews, get their whole plot busted open by a little boy. Hey, I heard that this was happening. Oh. So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, tell no one what you have told me. Which is unfortunately where we have to end tonight, but we know that Paul gets to Rome. Paul gets there. He continues to trust, continues to seek, continues to have this, man, do I want to have a faith like Paul? I mean, do you read these stories of the saints of old, and you're just like, man, I wish I had a faith like that. I wish I was wise like that. I wish I knew God and had that depth of relationship like that. But yet we so often read that and we're just like, I can't get there. And we just kind of like, well, I'll settle for getting halfway there. The same Spirit that lives in them, the same Spirit that lives in Paul is the same Spirit that lives in us. And it is training us. It is there to help us, to equip us, so that day by day, moment by moment, we can be equipped to have the same disposition, the same inclination, that when a situation hits us, we have been prepared, we have been ready. I don't have to know an answer for every single possible situation in my head because I can't. But I can prepare my heart for the situations with an answer to know that no matter the situation, I will give the same answer. That no matter what life comes at me, I will still choose Christ. That no matter what happens, I will still continue to say, yep, I'm still all in. even though it's the most bizarre and obscure thing I've ever thought about or never thought about in my entire life. Man, the saints of old encourage me greatly. You read the biographies, and it's something, if you haven't done, I'd strongly encourage you, even if you don't pick up a book, go online. You can find a whole bunch of anthologies of just short stories of the old saints and how they just lived moment by moment, day by day, and how they trained themselves to get to that point. It is incredible. And they are great examples for us as we move forward. Miles, would you please bring your team up? I told you we had to cover a lot of ground. And we did. But John and I have said it before. I would hope that as you read along with us and dive in, that this would be a conversation. If you have questions, that you would be reading it through and come and talk to us. We'd love to explore more of this too, but we covered a lot. How do you prepare yourself for life? Well, it starts now. It doesn't start then. It's like planting a tree. The best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago, but today is a good day to start for second. Same thing as preparing for Christianity. Do I wish I started 2 years ago? Yeah, I bet. But the second best day is now. The little decisions, looking at life through the providence, through the gaze, through the lens of Jesus. That's how we make decisions day by day, equipping us for the big moments that are coming. Have a great Sunday. Be blessed. Talk to you guys later.